Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, June 19th, 2022, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Axios Trump endorsement tracker, tracking which candidates President Trump has endorsed and which ones have won and lost for the upcoming midterm elections. Now, these are all in primary elections. Of course, we aren't looking at the general election and who has won and lost just yet for obvious reason, and truly speaking, a Trump endorsement really doesn't matter for a general election, looking at the fact that most of these elections, Donald Trump is going to endorse the Republican. It will be quite interesting to see what happens with President Trump in some of these general election races. Should he refuse to endorse a Republican for whatever reason, maybe that could in fact benefit the Democratic Party in an individual race. But generally speaking, these primaries are going to be the first true test and have already served as some very early first true tests as to what Donald Trump's endorsement means and his influence within the Republican Party. Now, looking at the Axios tracker here, what you see is just sort of a bar, not chart, but tracker where we can see the winners and losers of the competitive races. Now, President Trump has made endorsements beyond the very few that you see here, and the key term here is competitive races. Donald Trump has flaunted many times to Republican insiders and publicly that his endorsement rating has given a practically a 95% success rate for any Republican that gets the endorsement. But that's because Donald Trump endorses safe races. Competitiveness really only matters when it comes down to the endorsement. And if Donald Trump is endorsing in a district where there is an uncontested election or one or two other candidates against an incumbent, obviously that's not going to be competitive. Very rarely are these primaries competitive simply because voters very much adore incumbents in the general election, and it's only even further in a primary election. Looking at Axios right now with the Trump endorsement tracker, we are looking at the true competitive races where candidates might actually end up losing or have already lost. So we're looking at the U.S. Senate, then we're moving over to the U.S. House, and then we'll start talking about statewide elections because this is actually a territory where Donald Trump really stayed out of prior to the 2020 election. Statewide offices really were only touched on following the 2020 election because that's where the endorsements matter. Not necessarily on the U.S. Senate or House level because, of course, while those are the ever important midterm elections and congressional elections, the statewide offices are where Donald Trump could see potentially in 2024 some more support when it comes down to the elections or interfering in these elections that are held. More specifically in Secretary of State elections, where maybe a governor election or a Secretary of State election could alter the outcome of a presidential election, despite maybe the popular vote voting in one other direction. It will be quite interesting to see, but this is really where a lot of what these Trump endorsements matter, especially for the 2024 election, and I think it's really being downplayed and really not being covered as much as it should be by the mainstream media. But let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about these 8 technical Senate races, 6 of which have already passed. So really, most of these don't matter. And take a look at some of the results, or more so just looking at the endorsements, because we know almost all of these because they've been covered on my channel and by many members of the press. So in the U.S. Senate, 6 of the 8 endorsements have won so far, but the other 2 haven't necessarily been lost, but rather we don't have the elections yet. One of them will be a general election, and I know I said we're only talking about primary elections, but that's because the Senate election is where Kelly Tshibaka is running in the Alaska Senate race. The way that this works is that it is ranked choice voting, so the top 4 contenders in the first round primary, Kelly Tshibaka will make it in the top 4 contenders. She will head off into the general election and face off against Lisa Murkowski in a runoff technical system. Ranked choice voting means that we won't get the actual results of this endorsement because there is no true primary on the Republican side. So let's take a look. On the first endorsement, this is John Boosman in the state of Arkansas. Now, it is interesting because this is a state where the Republicans have dominated, but that primary was surprisingly competitive. If we take a look at the elections in the Senate race, this is for another video I had to jump over because I needed a tab to get to Wikipedia. If we take a look at the Republican primary, the candidates here, there was Jake Bucket, who ran, a former NFL player and a U.S. Army veteran. He ran, and the results were John Boosman got 58%, and Jake Bucket got 21%. Jan Morgan got 19%. The combined vote against an incumbent senator was 42%. It isn't something that I would say John Boosman should be fearful for the general election at all, or should be threatened in 6 years from now, but it is something to say that an incumbent senator didn't win in their primary as much as they should have. In 2016, that primary was 76-23. In 2010, that primary, while still an open race, what we found here in terms of the race, let's go ahead and take a look. John Boosman got about nearly what he got in this election as an incumbent. I mean, it was quite interesting to see the state of Arkansas have a somewhat competitive Republican primary. Realistically, Boosman was never going to lose, but it was just interesting, and it was an endorsement that did technically fit within the realm of competitiveness. J.D. Vance in Ohio, though, was certainly a hard-fought race. This was definitely an extremely close primary until the end, and in the final results, J.D. Vance won with 32% against Josh Mandel, who was actually the nominee for a different Senate seat back in 2012 in Ohio, ran in 2018, dropped out, and then ran again with a whole new personality. Lost to J.D. Vance, who got about 32% of the vote. So he won, but not necessarily by an extremely impressive amount. Looking at Ted Budd in the state of North Carolina, this is where, honestly, I think the Trump endorsement really made a difference. It mattered in Ohio because J.D. Vance had a history of coming out against President Trump. In fact, J.D. Vance had called President Trump in a similar or comparable fashion to Adolf Hitler. I mean, literally speaking, J.D. Vance should not have won this nomination and probably would not have without the Trump endorsement, but it really mattered in North Carolina, where Ted Budd ran against the former governor of the state, someone who had won statewide, and that was Governor Pat McCrory. Now, Pat McCrory lost in 2016, but won in 2012 and ran again for this Senate seat and started off as the immediate and initial frontrunner, polling somewhere in the mid to high 40s. And then as the months went on, Ted Budd started to rise, but the first poll ever released showed Ted Budd at just 9%. Then he went down to 5%, and then Donald Trump endorsed him. And following the endorsement, it only went up and up and up, and then by the end of it, Ted Budd was leading in every single poll from March 22nd onward. Pat McCrory really had no real shot, and by the end of the results, Ted Budd was able to win. Had Ted Budd not received that endorsement from President Trump, Pat McCrory likely would have won this nomination. He started off as the initial frontrunner and likely would have remained that way, and realistically, the Republicans probably would have been less likely to win the Senate race. So Donald Trump's endorsement really paid off in that state. Looking at Herschel Walker in the U.S. Senate, we don't really need to talk too much about it because Herschel Walker absolutely obliterated every other opponent, won by over 50 points in his primary, and the field was cleared for him. Donald Trump got people to drop out of the Senate race. Donald Trump got people to remove themselves and not even run in the first place. He did a lot of political maneuvering in order to have Herschel Walker win that Senate race, a huge victory for President Trump. Now, Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, I would say, would be a Trump benefit, but I will also like to say that there is some very interesting result out of that state. Dr. Oz didn't exactly win by an impressive amount. It was an extremely close one, and it was one that fractured the Republican Party across the state. Dr. Oz is a vulnerable Republican. He is not the likeliest one to win in Pennsylvania. In fact, the Democratic lieutenant governor is likelier to win. John Fetterman could very well defeat Dr. Oz. This is an endorsement victory for Trump, but I can't guarantee it will be a general election victory like I might be able to see Herschel Walker or Ted Budd or J.D. Vance or John Boosman. Dr. Oz is a lot more unpredictable and a lot less likely to win than the four prior to, but still very much a Trump endorsement victory. And Adam Laxalt in the state of Nevada won their primary. Adam Laxalt did well. I mean, Laxalt was probably the best GOP candidate and contender within the state of Nevada. It made sense. I think he ran against Sam Brown. But by the end of it, Adam Laxalt had used the Trump endorsement, won with 55% of the vote, and while did push a lot of the claims that President Trump did, I can't find many other Republicans that did not. And it's likely the reason why he won this primary in the first place. So Adam Laxalt is certainly a victory for President Trump. Like I said, Kelly Tshibaka, we won't know until the general election. Blake Masters, I think, will win that primary, and it looks like Donald Trump might go 7 out of 8 for his endorsements in the U.S. Senate. I don't think Kelly Tshibaka will win the general. And as for the House elections, let's move on. We're not going to spend as much time talking about some of these individual races because, as you can see with the shaded in box here, Donald Trump endorsed some incumbents in these races. 2 incumbents, Alex Mooney in the state of West Virginia and William Timmons in the South Carolina U.S. House race. But as we see in some of these non-open races, these are open seats are fit for the, open boxes rather than the closed ones, Donald Trump got 2 incumbents to win and 3 non-incumbents to win in races with incumbents. Let's take a look. Mike Carey won in U.S. House against an incumbent and won. In the state of Louisiana, Julia Letlow won in a non-open race, meaning there was an incumbent, and Russell Fry in South Carolina won against Tom Rice. Now, looking at the results in Russell Fry's district, let's go ahead and take a look at South Carolina. This is a very interesting primary because Russell Fry was running against Tom Rice. Tom Rice voted to impeach President Trump, and that was the determining factor that made Tom Rice lose this primary. It is quite interesting to see what happened within the race, but looking at Russell Fry's astounding victory and Tom Rice's really abysmal defeat shows that vote to convict President Trump or impeach President Trump was that determining factor that likely lost him re-election for someone who had won re-election multiple times and easily made it through the primaries. Now, looking at some of these open races, we saw some victories, good numbers for Donald Trump, but nothing super competitive. Ryan Zinke actually had a very interesting result because he nearly lost his primary. He was someone who should never have nearly lost his primary. He served in the U.S. House for Montana and won handedly every single time, and then left to join the Trump administration, went back, and barely won his primary, which is very interesting if you ask me. And then 3 of the Trump-endorsed candidates lost their primaries. Madison Cawthorn, an incumbent, lost to Chuck Edwards. Now, that was not necessarily because of the Trump endorsement by any means. In fact, that probably helped Madison Cawthorn get to where he was. But what lost him in Madison Cawthorn's district was the scandals that piled up, and nothing seemed to be going good for Madison Cawthorn, and by the end of it, he ended up losing. Susan Wright lost to Jake Ellzey. This was a U.S. House race, I believe, a special election. And in South Carolina again, while Tom Rice lost in his primary, Nancy Mace did not. Nancy Mace voted to not impeach President Trump, but still did not necessarily please President Trump. Nancy Mace wasn't exactly someone who went out against Donald Trump specifically, but she did not vote to decertify the election results, but instead voted to certify them. She was one of the few Republicans who did so, and she became a target of President Trump. Donald Trump endorsed Katie Arrington, someone who was the 2018 nominee for U.S. Senate, for U.S. House in the 1st District in South Carolina. Nancy Mace defeated her narrowly, but still did so. And as a result, Donald Trump's endorsement lost. As you can see, Donald Trump has endorsed candidates, incumbents and non-incumbents in some of these more important races against Liz Cheney, against Dan Newhouse, against other Republicans who had opposed President Trump, and then multiple open races. And Vernon Jones in Georgia's race, the reason why I'm pointing him out is because he is not likely to win. In fact, Governor Brian Kemp actually endorsed his opponent in this runoff election, and it doesn't look like Vernon Jones is going to win. So now, one of the most important things, the statewide offices, where we have 8 races won by the Trump-endorsed candidates and 6 lost and 21 total endorsements, it will be quite interesting. Now, Donald Trump endorsed 4 incumbents. These aren't surprising. Sid Miller, Ken Paxton, Greg Abbott, these are all names you should know and recognize for Texas, and then Frank LaRose in Ohio. These are incumbents who won, nothing super shocking. Then you move on to the candidates who won in open races. Well, land commissioner, not necessarily a consequential race, but what is consequential is governor. Doug Mastriano won in Pennsylvania, won the governor primary, and is definitely one of the more extreme candidates. A Trump endorsement might have helped him, but Doug Mastriano definitely won that on his own. In Michigan Attorney General, nothing super significant here, but we will see what happens. And in terms of the Nevada governor's race, Joe Lombardo, that endorsement definitely helped. He ran against Dean Heller being a Republican who was against President Trump, but still a more moderate one who technically could have had a possibility at winning the primary. Joe Lombardo easily took it away from him, especially in a more impressive result, knowing that you're running against a former statewide elected office holder, Dean Heller, who served in the U.S. Senate for the state of Nevada. I mean, it is very interesting to see that someone was able to defeat a former senator in a primary. But a lot of it came down to the Trump endorsement, but Joe Lombardo also was a very good candidate on his own for the Republican primary. Then taking a look at the 6 remaining list here of those who have been checked. These are endorsements who have lost. Now, Brad Raffensperger defeated Jody Hice in the state of Georgia, and this was a very shocking result. Brad Raffensperger openly opposed President Trump after Donald Trump had called him and asked him to find ballots to overturn the election in Georgia, after Donald Trump had vilified him, attacked him, and turned him into this enemy of the Republican Party and the people. Brad Raffensperger ended up defeating Jody Hice, a U.S. representative. It was a very impressive showing and a very good result for Brad Raffensperger. As for the state of Georgia, Another Trump endorsement loss. Nothing super impactful because it is insurance commissioner, but still very interesting to see that the Trump endorsement didn't exactly carry Republicans the way they thought it would in every single race. It certainly did in these 8 successful victories, though 4 of them should have been predicted. But looking at some of these losses, these also very well should have been predicted, and it's not exactly impressive. Jody Hice lost. Patrick Witt lost. And looking at the state of Ohio, why did I say combined Ohio and Idaho? Idaho, the lieutenant governor, ran against the governor and lost. Brad Little was unpopular. Donald Trump railed against him. Janice Mick, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that because I don't want to mess it up. But the result was the lieutenant governor had lost in the state of Idaho. Not a good result for the GOP, or at least the Trump side of the GOP. David Perdue lost to Brian Kemp by over 50 points. It was an astonishing defeat for David Perdue, and Donald Trump's endorsement went down the drain there. And then an attorney general in the state of Georgia, Chris Carr, defeated John Gordon. John Gordon being or maybe it was the other way around. I actually don't entirely remember. But the point being that the Trump-endorsed candidate lost in the state of Georgia, and then in Nebraska. This was an interesting race because of the fact that there was a 3-way race within the state of Nebraska. The Trump-endorsed candidate lost, but not by a super significant amount. You're talking 1 to 2 percentage points, nothing out of the ordinary. Definitely a close race. Could it have been won? Maybe, but it wasn't won, and it wasn't this deafening defeat to President Trump the same way that all of these Georgia losses were for the former president. And as for the remaining endorsements, you have Christine Noem. She is going to win that race. You have the remainder candidates, Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor, Governor. These candidates will likely win. I think looking at the state of Arizona, Carrie Lake, a new poll actually shows her out ahead by 12 points. Dan Cox might win. It could be interesting, though. He is running against a Hogan-endorsed candidate. And looking at Massachusetts Governor, Jeff Deal will win that Republican nomination. Lieutenant Governor in Georgia, it seems as if there could be a possibility that Burt Jones wins. In Arizona, Secretary of State, and also Michigan Secretary of State. We will see what happens in those races. But generally speaking, the remaining candidates here will probably win altogether. So, main takeaway is that Donald Trump's endorsements have proved to be successful, but it doesn't work everywhere. While Donald Trump definitely has a lot of influence over the GOP, it is clear that voters in the Republican Party aren't exactly willing to back his candidates to the same way they might have 2 years ago or 4 years ago. I think Donald Trump definitely has a good showing and has a good case to make to the GOP in 2024, especially to those who he has endorsed and who have won their primaries and who could win the general election. Someone is going to see this as a reason why they will endorse Donald Trump immediately for 2024, and it will be a huge bump to the former president. So, generally speaking, I would say a Trump-endorsed candidate should win their race, but there are anomalies, and some of them are pretty embarrassing. But by the end of this, I think Donald Trump definitely has proven his worth and shown that his endorsement really does mean a lot. So, moving forward into the future primaries, into some of these more competitive races, keep your eye out to see who Donald Trump endorsement and who doesn't. Because in most cases, the Trump-endorsed candidate will win, and it will likely be a good result for whoever is to win that endorsement from President Trump, especially in these races such as Michigan's Republican primary or others where we have no real direction as to who's going to win, where a Trump endorsement might make the difference and benefit one of those candidates tremendously. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.